So, Troy, ready when you are. Hello, I'm Nadia Bilchik, and I am delighted to be joined by Elaine Rosenblum, and she is in fact the Chief Articulation Officer Pro Form U. So Elaine, a very warm welcome, and before we begin, won't you share exactly what the Chief Articulation Officer is and does?
Well, when I was deciding on what my title would be of my new combined company, I was trying to think of a sort of a catchy title that was in keeping with what the new type of communication is especially among young people. So I decided that Chief Articulation Officer, meaning articulation in terms of verbal articulation, but we're also going to talk about body language articulation today. So communication comes in many forms and you have to articulate all of them, whether it be mirroring as you and I are doing between each other, a lot of eye contact, or actually the written word or your verbal word. So it encapsulated all those skill sets which are so important in the knowledge economy. And it sort of went with my brand. So that is how I came up with Chief Articulation Officer.
So let's talk about the transition from an in-person environment to a virtual environment and the changes you're seeing and what advice you have for us to articulate better and communicate better in a virtual world.
Well, I actually have a book coming out, and I had written a whole blog and a chapter on the difference between in-person interviews and video interviews or virtual interviews. And the difference is, I think the preparation is actually the same with a few key points that you want to highlight in a video. We're actually more comfortable on the phone than we are on video. Video can be very distracting. You're looking at yourself. I tell people to actually turn off their video if they can in an interview. I don't think when you're doing one-on-one in a Zoom, it's possible, but kind of stay away from your own picture.
That's an excellent point. Okay, so let's start with just that one. I think that is such a good point. So you're saying that if you can, you're being interviewed, look into your camera at the interviewer, but don't have your image so that it doesn't distract you.
Yes, exactly. I find on FaceTime, I'm very distracted by my own image. But right now, as I'm talking to you, I'm actually in the upper left-hand corner of my screen, and I am just blocking that out. It's kind of in my peripheral vision, and that is it. I am not concentrating on how I look or how I'm coming across. That should be practiced way before you start an interview. If you don't have a professional that you can enlist like me or you, then practice with your parents. It's so easy to hook up into a Zoom call or a FaceTime call and practice looking your interviewer in the eye. It is probably the best piece of advice I can give in this session.
That's excellent. And as you said, looking your interviewer in the eye means looking into your camera, which is counterintuitive because you actually want to look down at the person who's speaking. That is an excellent Elaine Rosenblum tip.
So how am I doing right now? Looking down?
So now you're looking, so the difference of looking down, and I think show that to us. Show the difference between looking into the camera and looking at us versus looking down at the person who's speaking.
Okay, I'm looking down at you now.
Right, versus?
Up into my camera, hopefully.
Excellent.
Your eyes. So how's my camera angle? Because that's what I would tell someone to ask their interviewer. Is this a good camera angle? If not, tell me how I can adjust it so that you and I are looking at each other in the eye. Take the initiative to do that with your interviewer. Your interviewer might not know anything more about tech than you do.
That is great advice. And I'm so delighted because I just see Shiraz Oken has joined us, and she is a consultant with EY. And Shiraz, and for those of you who have just joined us, Elaine Rosenblum, Chief Articulation Officer for Proform U. And she is talking about how you can even say to your interviewer before you begin, I just want to check that this is comfortable for you. Am I looking you in the eye? I think that's a great tip because often you arrive and you feel that you are being interviewed and you feel nervous and you don't remember that you can actually have a brief moment of connection in that way. That's great advice.
Exactly. And it demonstrates skills that you know how to make someone else feel more comfortable. It's all kinds of skills that you will bring to whatever the job is. And those are great skills to have, to be able to manage a meeting or a process with empathy toward the other people involved. And that is about collaboration, which is one of the 3 skills in the knowledge economy that are key.
So of the knowledge economy, collaboration is critical. What are the other 2 things?
Creativity and communication. And when I say creativity, it doesn't necessarily mean hand skills or being able to draw. When I say creativity, I mean the ability to creatively problem solve, to think outside the box. And those are the 3 most important skills in the knowledge economy.
Now, it's interesting, Elaine, because you are an attorney by profession and you do a lot of coaching with students and help prepare them. So you actually have been preparing people to do virtual interviews for many, many years.
Yes, that is true. Virtual interviews are not that new. Often young people and professionals are concerned that a video interview might be different than an in-person interview, and it is different, but I don't think the preparation is different. I think that you need to, maybe one of the tweaks I would say with a video interview is you need to over articulate a little bit. And I really learned the art of this in doing webinars where I couldn't see anybody else. So, and I'm sure you've had this happen to you, where you're sitting in a room by yourself trying to convey concepts and there's no visual. So when you do that, you have to over articulate, sort of like a cartoon character, in order to emphasize your point. And I tell people that if you can't see the other person, you literally, I'm using my hands right now, and it helps me with my body language and it helps my voice come across and make a point. So you have to be actually physical in your articulation of what you want to say.
That's, again, very valuable. And Elaine, I read something yesterday that the reason these Zoom calls or these webinars, or whether you're doing Skype, whatever it is, actually require so much more energy, because if we were face to face, so much of it would be organic. I'd be able to see you, I'd be able to feed off you. But in this kind of artificial situation, we're working so much harder. And I think awareness around that, and you've just reinforced that. Now, the other thing that you do, besides helping people get ready for their in-person interviews, and I will give everybody details about how they can reach you afterwards, is you help people come up with resumes that stand out. So what are the Elaine Rosenblum top tips for resume writing in a virtual world and in an age of virtual overload?
Well, one of the things I would first say about resume writing is that it is probably one of the most painful things you can do, because you are putting yourself on a piece of paper and then putting a dollar sign or a value proposition on top of your head. And so if you're writing a resume for an academic interview or an academic application.
Hey, baby, what do you want?
Hello, loves. We're going to ask everybody on the call to mute. Thank you. Yes, carry on.
You're putting a value on your head, so to speak. And so if you're a student applying academically somewhere, you're saying, am I good enough to go to this particular school or medical school? If you're a professional, you're saying, am I worth that dollar value? And that's a very emotionally difficult proposition. So my first piece of advice would be, if you're going to write a resume, enlist somebody to hold your hand, because it's painful for everybody. I've had CEOs come in and say, I want to rewrite my resume, and they are in tears, literally. And they've been doing this for a long time. I think it is, I liken it to looking in the mirror naked. It's difficult. So that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, just making a resume that stands out. Simple, simple, simple. It does not need to be fancy. If you work in a creative field, that's a whole nother situation. And if you're creative, you should be able to know exactly how it's supposed to look. Otherwise, I think clean, simple. I like a profile at the top. And my best piece of advice is take that job description and reverse engineer the skills that are asked for, the job requirements, and make sure they are in your resume. But do not do it word for word, because that makes you look lazy. You've got to take the time to reframe what the skills and requirements are on your resume to fit back into whatever your past experience is.
Another thing you speak about and write about very articulately is the 5 generations in the workplace. So won't you go through those with us? And again, what advice, guidance do you have for us to communicate more effectively and seamlessly?
So you've got to communicate cross-generationally. Yes, I think that's right. Across generations. So you have to sometimes stay away from fatty language. Somebody else might not know what you're talking about. The real issue about communication in general and cross-generationally is that we are so used to texting that we don't say what's in our head. We don't articulate it well enough. We stunt, blunt, slur, and blur our words. And the other person has no idea what you're talking about. And so clean, simple, and specific. Specificity is probably my favorite word when I'm working with a client. You've got to be specific. And the other thing that you can do to improve your communication is give examples. So
the thing that's great, and I'm going to make sure that people who want this advice come to you for coaching. The other thing you speak about is so many people say, I'm fine and relaxed with peers, but I have difficulty articulating. And the way you say it exactly is, I get stressed. And the way, I just love how you phrased this. You said, I struggle with articulating my thoughts during important conversations. What can I do to improve? What are Elaine's nuggets to improve?
Okay, practice, practice, practice. I think you have to be very clear about what you want to say. Even myself, and I live and die and breathe this every day of the week, I had to prepare for this interview. I had to think about what are the key points I want to make. Actually, here's another tip for virtual interviews. I actually take a piece of paper and with a big Sharpie pen, write bullet points on white pieces of paper, and they are actually hung up across the room. I'm cheating.
Brilliant. Beautiful.
To do a virtual interview than an in-person interview, because you can have a cheat sheet, right? But make sure it's level with your camera and you're not looking up. You are looking, it is straight ahead. I'm tempted to turn my camera around so you can see them. They're painters taped onto the wall over there. And
that is a great nugget. Last thing, you have coined the phrase Gen Text, which I think is another Elaine genius term. What about people who are used to texting and the way you phrase it now actually are forced to have more formal communication? What is your advice or guidance to, and you've actually coined the phrase saying we're all Gen Texters.
Well, right. When I first came up with Gen Text, I was really thinking about the generation that came up with phones in their hands and communicating via, initially it was instant messaging. Now it's text. I mean, my son doesn't even want to have a conversation with me. He only wants to text. So you have a whole generation of people who are used to communicating, and especially in 140 characters, and they aren't being specific and they aren't saying what they mean. So they have to practice in order to do this interviewing. I always say, for right now, our generation, me and you, and everybody that's on this call, we're making the rules. They may change, but for right now, we've made the rules. So Gen Text has to pop into our game plan, the rules of our game, so to speak. However, I've noticed in the last couple of years that we're all Gen Text. I'm Gen Text. It has affected my communication skills, my articulation skills. So we all have to practice. Interviewing is a different animal, and you have to treat it as a different animal and practice so that you treat it and achieve your goals.
That is a really, really nice. So what I'm going to do is ask our guests to stay on the call, but I'm going to end this wonderful recording. But if you want to reach Elaine Rosenblum, won't you just remind us what your services are, how people who are navigating this new virtual workplace can reach you, and just last thoughts and advice. I know we talk about this time as unprecedented, but it's really unpredictable.
Yes. So you asked me a couple of different questions.
Yes. So number one, how can we reach you? And then the last bit of advice.
Okay. My website is proformu.com, PROFORM, the letter U.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on the web. If you just Google my name, and interviewing, I will come up on any number of opportunities. If you want to call me, you can call my cell phone. My number is 917-685-8610. I also have a ProFormU number that's listed on the web, and I don't know it by heart, and I apologize.
I do want to end, though, with your 3 key things that we all have to do to navigate. You said it was, and I think it began with a C.
Well, you have to collaborate, communicate, and think and problem solve creatively. It's the 3 C's, and they are the most important skill sets in the knowledge economy. And we're all living in the knowledge economy, and it's never been so clear as to what we're living through now, and we're all having to communicate via video. This is like an explanation point on those skill sets.
Elaine Rosenblum, Chief Articulation Officer for ProFormU. Thank you for being so articulate with us today.
My pleasure.
Okay.